Hi, good afternoon, everybody. So we've got Ravi here today, who has actually come up with a series of queries that is required for one to climb the ladder in terms of either a lateral move within the company or outside of it. And so this one-on-one session is going to be about the query clarifications that are there from Ravi's side of the world. Yes, Ravi, so please go ahead with the list of queries that you have today, and we'll get them answered one after the other.
Sure. So thanks a lot. Sir, I have been through some recent interviews, and even within the company I'm working, there our enterprise architecture practice is venturing into new areas, and we are brainstorming always how we can improve, how we can help our business departments to have a good and a solid documentation and how we can approach their problems to solve them in an innovative way. So some of the questions which I would like to discuss is like how have you helped business with enterprise architecture?
Okay, so basically they are asking you to quote instances of how you have used EA in your scheme of work and how has it helped solve customer pain points.
Practical examples, yeah.
So you should actually be quoting instances of some business problem that your product owner came to you with, or your product strategy guy came to you with, or your business team came to you with, and say, okay, we need an architecture for this, we need an IT proposal for this. And then what are the kind of best practices that you have used? So how have you gone from vision, mission, strategy, building a business case, collecting all the requirements from all the 9 yards in terms of how you're going to collect those requirements in terms of the epics, the strategy level decisions, the investment, the business use case, the funding, the real need for why do you need to transform your business, what kind of methodologies have you used to transform these things, how have you mixed agile with architecture, how have you planned your continuous business value thing using transition architectures. If you are able to showcase value of all these things one after the other, and what are the architecture principles that you followed, what is the architecture design, high level one, low level one, what is the kind of details that you is gone into, using the reference architecture patterns, and what are the architecture best practices that you've used, and have you used microservices architecture, service oriented architecture, container based stuff, whatever has helped you create and reuse architecture artifacts, and that you can actually institutionalize it within your environment, so that you tell that, okay, we use this for solving this particular customer pain point, and this is like a reference template that you can use to solve similar problems. So if you are actually doing all of that, then you can say that, okay, this is typically how we have used a business problem as a reference context, and here is what we have done to build an IT solution for it using these architecture methods, patterns, and styles. And this is the mix of people, process, technology things that we have done. So if you're able to showcase and build a story around that and tell them, citing instances of, okay, what have you done? Take a project that you've actually worked on, right from the customer requirements on how you went into a high-level architecture definition document, to the execution part of it, to the rollout, the implementation, the governance cycle of it, where you influenced by regulatory changes, where you influenced by compliance requirements, what are the kind of architecture principles that you followed. So if you can actually put all of these things and weave a story, it becomes quite, a full-fledged case for you to say that, okay, this is how we've actually used an enterprise architecture practice, and you could say who was a chief architect and what was your particular role in that. So were you a domain architect, were you a solutions architect, or were you a technology architect, and what are the kind of key decisions that you have taken actually in the whole story, and what was your contribution. What they will ask you, okay, can you name one or two of the major decisions that you actually taken that will help you to what is your key role, what is the challenge from the business, and what is the kind. So be ready with presenting what are the kind of steps or actions that you have taken in case study that you have actually used, or in the project that you use. And talk about, be ready to talk about the sample kind of products and solutions that you've worked on. So I think that will help them gain enough confidence that, yeah, you have been involved in those kind of roles.
Okay, so can you please elaborate on this mix agile with architecture?
Yeah, so mixed agile with architecture is typically architecture is supposed to be slow moving stuff, and agile is supposed to be fast moving. So how do you mix strategic level decisions with quick and fast? Because agile wants everything quick and fast, right? You have to deliver things as everything as of yesterday, or probably in weeks and sprints and that kind of stuff. So how do you kind of ensure that you are creating continuous business value, or what they call it as a minimum viable architecture, or continuously shippable increments? So if you are able to plan your architecture artifacts in such a way that week after week you're able to add some continuous value to the business, this is how we use the principles of slicing and dicing, and we are able to incrementally update and create a free flowing architecture, so that it helps them understand, yes, this is where the mixing of the agile and the architecture best practices comes into picture. Because now most environments in many companies have become completely agile, and so there is if you say use the word architecture at times, it becomes like an antithesis. Oh, do you have the time for architecture? Because we are continuously rolling out stuff. That's what is the tendency for people. But then you could say that, okay, we use the foundation principles from the architecture world, but those are all delivered using weekly sprints, and they are rolled out in increments with continuous business value. So if you're able to kind of impose upon these things to people, then I think you made your point very clear that you know what is mixing agile with architecture.
Generally, sir, in the companies, like I can give you experience from my company that we started the enterprise architecture practice recently, and then we said, okay, we were confronted with the issue that the business was not ready to, business is not organized. Let's say they do not have the resources at the moment to who can contribute in business architecture. And then my chief architect, or my chief enterprise architect, decided that we will first start with IT. So we started with application portfolio. We have collected applications from all the business, from all the areas, put them into a tool, enterprise architecture tool, and right now we are into doing technology portfolio gathering. So that's how we started off. We said, okay, we'll do a bottom-up approach. We have already seen in TOGAF that it can be started in anywhere, right? Be that need not be always followed very very much in some particular order. You can start from anywhere. But the question is that once we have finished this IT part, of course we will jump into business architecture. And I guess that will that be the end of EA, or do you think
EA is actually, it's an ongoing thing actually. So EA is actually ongoing, so you doesn't have to be the end of EA. So what you can actually do is and people say that, okay, once I hand over the architecture, are you done? EA is actually a continuously evolving practice, because governance was there even before the start of the project. Governance is an ongoing thing, and governance will continue to be there even when you are actually running the architecture and executing the architecture. So it is not like just one case handoff and say you have done with it and then you finish off the handshake there. It's an ongoing process, so it never ends that way. But of course, the involvement of it, it's more at a strategic level initially, but the governance is always there. Once you put up a process in place, so you need somebody to do code review, somebody need to do design reviews, somebody to do the compliance review, somebody to do the implementation review, somebody need to look at business compliance, whether and look at the IT fitment of the solution. So all of these things are pretty much required, and they don't go away anywhere, no matter what life cycle of the project you are in. So you could have rolled out one product or solution, but it still calls upon a strong involvement from the EA team in terms of putting up a process so that it's seen as an ongoing activity, and it's not a one-touch handshake, let and go, that sort of stuff.
Okay, sir. Other question which comes up very often is that how is modeling done in enterprise architecture? What all architecture modeling techniques have you used, and what all modeling artifacts have you delivered so far?
Yeah, so formal modeling, it can be using white paper, and you could actually use white paper to do modeling. pen and paper to do modeling. Typically, I've seen people use Visio, PowerPoint, Excel sheets, Word documents to do modeling sort of stuff. But if you see what language have you used to do modeling for business process, you can do BPMN, business process modeling notations. For enterprise architecture modeling, you can use Archimate, which is actually a good standard for helping you showcase the value that people get out of it. And you can use various artifacts. There are around, I think, a good number of artifacts. There are 54 to 60 artifacts in the whole thing. So that is around, I think, 60 plus artifacts are there on the TOGAF list of artifacts. So you can actually use them to showcase value to your stakeholders, saying this is how we are doing business architecture, data, application, technology. Apart from that, you can use a lot of consulting templates that are there from various guys, like the Porter's 5-Vibe technique, Toyota's 5-Vibe technique. Then there are and the root cause analysis, like the fishbone technique, Ishikawa fishbone analysis thing, a lot of Six Sigma practices. So people use a combination of all these things when you are into a full-fledged EA practitioner. You can use a combination of UML also to some extent. UML, although it is very technology oriented, but to the extent that it makes sense, you can use an UML diagram also and depict certain workflows, for instance, sequence diagrams or activity diagrams, and software engineering diagrams and things like that. So you could say that you've used a combination of these or all of these things to draw up your modeling things. So basically, they say a picture is equivalent to 1,000 words. So if you can show a real model of this is how I want to play my architecture out, they'll be far more convinced to you than just a couple of pages of what you plan to do. So if you're able to showcase this is how this part of the architecture connects to the data, data connects to business, business connects to technology, and put them on a piece of, or probably explain that these are my high-level mission and vision, these are my goals, these are my objectives, these are my drivers for the business, these are my KPIs, and this is how all of that is going to be linked to the high-level architecture. So if you're actually bringing all of that out, so I think that you get a good buy-in at the table. And you appear to be, more convincing in terms of able to show that. So I think your objective in terms of the modeling would be to lay your hands on UML, on BPMN, if it's business process modeling, some amount of data modeling that you should be knowing to the extent that you should know how to draw up entity relationship diagrams. You should be able to know how you can actually do conceptual diagrams and all of that sort of stuff. So if you are able to do all of these things, then you could be seen as a candidate who has done some amount of modeling in his job.
Okay. One thing more is recently asked me what metrics can be used to validate conformance of a solution to an architecture.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because a lot of people talk about what is the value of EA to the business and all of that sort of stuff, right? So typically, if you are in the job of, let us say you are having an e-commerce website and you're developing that. So the metrics to be used is what is user activity on the website? That's a good metric. How many people are staying on the website and making a buy and staying and making purchases and sales? So as that improved, because of an EA involvement or your architecture efforts, has those numbers increased? What is the amount of latency on the website? What is the number of concurrent users? What is the transaction input? What is the uptime, downtime of the services? What is the turnaround time of, how you're fixing things in the architecture if things go bad or if things are broken? How do you fix them? So all of these could be valid metrics. So they could be business metrics that you could capture, or you could be technology KPIs that you can actually capture as a part of your architecture. So you could use a combination of all of these things to drive your architecture efforts. So typically you should say that, okay, what is the business looking forward? I put this solution in place. So what is the business looking forward from me? If I do develop this thing for you, what is that you're looking for us? So what exactly, if we do these XYZ things, how is it going to improve value for your business? So ask the question from them and then tailor your metrics and say, okay, these are the metrics that we will measure based on these kind of inputs from the business. And once they give a go ahead, you say, okay, at the end of the project, we are going to see how good the solution has been based on these kind of matrices, and that will help us get the correct level of buy-in and confidence from the business. Because typically it will be a technology come business KPIs that you need to measure, but always ask the business, what is that you guys want? Because when you say you're implementing a cloud for the solution for farmers, for let us say urban irrigation or smart irrigation kind of stuff. For the smart farmer, he doesn't care whether it's Azure or Google Cloud or AWS or something. For him, cloud means will it rain or not, and that is the only thing that he's bothered about. So they have a very different metric in terms of what we think is metric versus what is a metric from the business side. So those guys will give you the hard facts about, okay, what is how easy is the solution to use? Is a portal web friendly? Do I need to send people on training to make them use the website? So you find out what are the kind of matrices by talking to them. And then from an IT side of things, you can say that, okay, to achieve these business goals, these are my IT KPIs or metrics that I will put in place so that I can actually achieve those business numbers. That's how you should be looking at those matrices.
Then there is a very interesting question. So what kind of design patterns have you used in the past, especially in SOA? They ask.
So SOA, I think I'll send you an offline list of some 15 to 20 principles that you can use for design. So one is, of course, loose coupling. The other is auto scaling. Then your services have to be idempotent, which means they have to be standalone, and they should be stateless services as far as possible. They should have high levels of integration, loose coupling, cohesion, maintainable. They should be portable. They should be easily serviceable. Then they should be easily discoverable. There is around 15, 20 of them, which are quite famous in the service-oriented architecture world. Still relevant in the microservices way, of course, with a little bit of tweaking here and there, you can use them still. And those are all because these service-oriented architecture used to be taught for 4 full days during the high days of SOA, which was like 7-8 years back. SOA was as important as microservices is today. Even today, it is important for legacy transformations. So you could use, I'll just remind me, I'll send you the list of those 15, 20 principles that are there on the SOA one. So that will help you to brush up those principles.
And so how should I answer this question? What design patterns have you used?
So you can say that we have used, we have made our services stateless. We have made them highly loosely coupled. We have our services are idempotent. They are granular. They are atomic in nature, which means its service is independent by itself. We've identified the smallest grain of functionality and made that and encapsulated that as a modular service, and this service calls another service, and the interdependency between these services are managed using the overall architecture design principle, which is the crux of the service-oriented architecture design. So we have used a series of these principles, transactionality of the service. Then you could say, how are you trying to avoid interlocking between services? Because on the business side, it may look like they are very transparent services, but deep down the database layer, they may go and lock each other transactions and cause latency in the architecture. So you can say that we are actually not, we have designed the services as they are modular and idempotent. So you can say that this is how you used services to build a scalable, robust architecture.
Could you give some more design pattern examples apart from SOA? Like what should one
design patterns? It's typically, if you are at a programming level, if you have done it a modular design at that level, typically design pattern questions will be asked. And if you are applying for an enterprise architecture role, they will ask you those things, but not in detail. But if you're looking at general design patterns, there could be gang of 4 patterns like factory pattern, abstract factory, singleton, and then publish subscribe pattern, observer pattern, chain of responsibility pattern, and multi-threaded pattern. So you could use a lot of those kind of patterns. So there is, these days they have technology-based patterns also, like one for .NET, one for Java, and this sort of stuff. But design patterns, typically, if you look at the gang of 4 patterns, they are across programming languages. So as I told you, all these abstract factory interface is the pattern. You should always code for an interface and never for an implementation. You should always keep your implementation separate. The logical and the physical parts in your architecture should be kept separate, because your logical part is what is dependent on the rest of the architecture, and you can change your underlying physical architecture if you keep them separate. If you tightly couple them, it becomes like a completely, single, what do they call, big ball of mud architecture, or noodles architecture, or spaghetti architecture. So that is typically how you will need to answer those kind of questions.
Okay. Fine. Then what have you done in data architecture?
So data architecture, you'll have to say, how have you used data architecture? So if your involvement is just using some database and tables and somebody else has done the design, you can say that, okay, we use the schemas, we have actually worked with these databases, and which are normalized databases, which were denormalized databases, which had these following entities. These E&R relationships were there. This is the data security diagram details that we have done. These entities had these kind of CRUD relationships: create, read, update, delete, access on those parameters when we call from business functions or services. So you could say that, you've used all of those kind of details when it comes to data architecture. And if you've been involved also in some amount of data designing, then you can say that the business gave us these kind of entity requirements. We crafted the following kind of data entities for them, and we created these logical data diagram. Based on that, we created a conceptual data diagram. Based on that, we created a logical data diagram. From that, we derived a database schema. Then we did a database architecture based on them. And if you have used any kind of data massaging, data personalization, depersonalization, data management, archival, data retrieval, database backups. So you can say you've worked on them. You've worked on data encryption. You can say you've worked on data encryption, that sort of stuff. So whatever is your involvement with the data, or if you just use as an application user some kind of data to do using your architecture, you can just say, okay, that's what my involvement is. I wasn't involved in the design end to end, but we had a strong DBA team which used to give us the approved schemas from the architects team, and we ended up using that in our application. And the application were able to use these using various roles and CRUD details, that sort of stuff. So we can look at that.
Okay, sir. Data security diagram. I think I have seen one data security diagram.
Yes, it is there in the list of the artifacts. That is there, correct.
Artifact. I have seen it. It's very generalized, but it's still there. Walk me through a time when you led enterprise change.
So let us say you've been tasked with doing some kind of change in the company as a lead or a manager or a solution architect or some kind of an architect. So the business team comes to you and say, okay, I want you guys to implement a single sign-on for a company. So then the business reason for the single sign-on was one-touch solution, right? He just needs to be logged into the portal once, and he can access multiple services and clients across the board. So that is the business decision. So how did that business guy give the requirement, and what was your level of analysis that you put in forward? So when you say SSO, what exactly is the technology implication of SSO? What kind of certification bodies did you involve to roll out the SSO? Who were the certification providers for that SSO? Did you use an LDAP? Was it a commercial LDAP or an open source LDAP? So did you use buy versus build decisions? Did you go for a paid solution versus a homegrown solution? How was the integration done? How did you get the architecture approved? What are the loosely coupled interfaces that you've used? What are the typical interfaces in getting that whole thing implemented? So if you're able to kind of impose upon the interview that all of these kind of details, then he will understand that, okay, yes, this guy has actually gathered requirements and helped teams to implement them, and he knows the business side of the ask plus the technology fulfillment of that ask. also in terms of what solutions to use and what are the different challenges that are used in terms of creating that solution. So it could be concurrency, load balancing, throughput, XYZ kind of concerns that you actually faced. So all of those things will come just from one kind of a simple business ask. So if you are able to put all of that details, I think that becomes a very good detail for you to tell them, this is how I led you. It could be a small change like that. It doesn't have to be company-wide change that you are helping the company go and do digital transformation. Like if you have an example like that, yes, great, go ahead and tell what exactly did you do in the digital transformation side of story. So for instance, recently I was talking to guy from one of these companies called Diageo. So he said, because Diageo is a spirit company, so they make, all these beverages. And because of Corona, their business was being affected a lot, and they were not able to get business, and people are stopped going to wines and bars, and so they were not making enough sales. So they just they had this business initiative to transform. So I asked him the same question. Okay, tell me some business transformation initiative that you have led. And he said, see, actually, we were required to transform our business digitally. And what we ended up doing was, this was the ask from the business, that help customers to come online and do purchases online. So what was preventing them from creating an online beverage experience is we created a 5 to 10 minute video on how to set up a home bar, like how do you mix your own cocktail and mocktail and set up that whole thing. And he said they created that 5 to 10 minute video and then sent it to all their existing customers, and then sales shot up like anything, like, oh great, we don't have to visit a bar to have a good time. We can do it from the comfort of our home, that sort of stuff. So that's, and then they put some technology solutions around it, crafted, but this was the business ask, how do you make people to go back to the concept of buying stuff even when the environment is not conducive, and there's this pandemic that was there, and they used this as a transformation initiative to drive business. So you can use such examples from your own business that you've come across.
Would it be possible for you to suggest me some videos like this, like just you mentioned right now, so that I can at least get some, because I'm right now working only for one company. I would like to have experiences from other companies, how they have, for example, had a requirement or had a challenge and how the architect resolved it.
Yeah, I'll suggest you those videos. There is one which comes to my mind right away, which is the ING, which is based in Amsterdam, Netherlands, ING Bank. ING Bank's business transformation. Just look up that video. I'll try to share them offline to you. It's there on YouTube also, how they transformed their business using the business ask, and how they made the whole experience using design thinking, using business transformation practices, how they put up an architecture in place, and how they drove architecture and business level decisions using the business ask, and how they created various squad teams, and how they used metric style architecture, metric style organization to drive those initiatives. That's a very nice video, nicely done on YouTube. I'll share that link actually, wherein I think the chief architect or the head of engineering, I think one of them are talking about that in a good amount of detail. So I think that I'll send you that.
Okay, sir. Then a very often asked question is, how will you convince your department that your architecture is correct? Especially, let's say head of a department comes in and he says, no, I have a different picture in my mind, but you are showing something entirely different, or I don't agree with you. How will you convince those people that your architecture is correct?
So typically the best answer for that is they have this unsaid rule at Facebook that anything that is working is the best proof of architecture. So they say before you come to a meeting, show us a prototype. So if you are able to show a prototype and it is working to the satisfaction of the stakeholders, then you say you actually created an architecture which is going to work. So if you are able to create architectures that work at least at a prototype level. Then you can ask people their opinions and showcase it, do a demo and say, okay, what is good about this? Okay, you say it's not good, it's not up to your liking. Okay, say what could be improved here. Is it the transactional feature of the application that needs to be improved? Is it not maintainable? Is it not portable? Is it not scalable? What is that you want it to be changed? Ask those kind of questions. So there are a set of things that you can actually ask when you're evaluating architectures. So is it portable? Is it serviceable? Is it loosely coupled? Is it maintainable? Does it have nationalization? Is it multi-world support? Is it supporting caching, load balancing, throughput? So all of these parameters, check on what the stakeholders are saying, that, okay, when you say it's not fitting the bill, what exactly do you mean by that? Can you explain that further? And then once they give those inputs, you tell them whether you are able to address that in the same architecture, or you say that, okay, we will actually be prototyping that particular feature that you said, and we'll be incorporating into this. So that's how you should be tackling those kind of queries.
Okay. Sir, regarding you mentioned about this Toyota i5.
No, 5 Whys. Toyota 5 Whys. So Toyota 5 Whys is something like this. So, something, for instance, why are you depressed? I'm depressed because I don't want to eat food. Why don't I want to eat food? Yesterday I called up somebody back home. They were not happy, so I'm not happy. Why did that make a person? So you ask why? Why? So you ask. They say after you ask 5 Whys, you will be left with no more whys. So if you ask that 5 whys for any kind of a question, be it technology, business, personal relationship related stuff, you will get the answers. If you continuously ask why 5 times, there's no more that you need to probe further. So that could be one way in which you can actually address long-standing painful problems.
Okay. Sir, a general question, I know that you are working for various companies, but if a person like me or anybody else who is stuck in a company and wants to know more in enterprise architecture, what is going on, which books do you read, which videos do you follow, can one follow to be abreast with what's going on around, what new terminologies are coming up, what is the best read, what is the best source to follow?
Yeah, I think a lot of stuff comes from LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a very good place. You just follow the leaders on LinkedIn that you admire, or you want yourself to be in the shoes of, like, after 5 years, I want to be this kind of person. Then follow that guy and see what all he's posting, what he's sharing, how he's commenting. Then comment on those things. Go to the LinkedIn groups. Then go to those various groups on LinkedIn, like EA group, Solution Architecture group, TUGAF group, then anything on business transformation, digital transformation groups. Join them on architecture and solution design, and comment on those groups. Get people to follow you back. You follow them, and you learn from a lot of the journey, and ask questions to people. And some guys say, okay, here is my presentation I made on this particular case study. So if you are following blockchain, so Google, YouTube for blockchain case studies, like how do they implement blockchain. So for instance, today I just there was a nice report on how UN has planning to adopt blockchain for sustainability initiatives. So get a grip of that, and just narrow down on your niche that you want to focus on. Is it security? Is it blockchain? Is it supply chain? Or is it enterprise-wide transformation initiatives that you want to focus on? So just go to that area and then follow the leaders there on YouTube, on LinkedIn, on Twitter, and just keep on following, read up on what that guy is going to say every now and then. And then you just do that for a year. They say continuously, either you post something or read something every day. I just talked to another colleague of mine, a friend recently, and he said he doesn't sleep on a given day without 1 hour of additional reading. No matter how busy his whole day is, he spends at least 1 hour to half an hour reading some stuff on a Kindle book or an audio book, or he actually watches a YouTube topic of his interest. So he says the world is so, because we are in a knowledge-based age now. So if you don't update your knowledge, you would be pretty much outdated that way. So he says he doesn't sleep, at least if he doesn't put that half an hour to 1 hour of watching something of his interest, and then only he sleeps. It may not be immediate priority for him, but it's like a 5 or 10 year plan that after 3 years, 4 years, I want to be, this. So you just focus on what you want to be and narrow down your niche, and then make a plan. So you'll reach there in like 1 or 2 years or 3 years, but you'll definitely reach there.
Okay, so can I switch to project management or agile project management now?
Yes, go ahead, please.
Okay. So they generally ask, okay, you are into project management, so tell us what agile methodologies do you use in your project management, or which techniques do you use in your project?
So I think if it is coming to things like that, you should say how you yourself have transitioned from a waterfall to the way agile has worked out for you. So have you used safe agile or scrum or extreme programming, for instance, or test-driven development, or using DAD or disciplined agile thing, or less LESS is another agile method. There's so many of them. So whatever has worked for you in the past, just quote them, what you have used, and how have you used it, because some companies use it in a very specific way. They tailor it for their own requirements. How do you do the agile estimations, for instance? How do you do the agile planning, for instance? How do you create teams? How do you look at, some people use Kanban plus agile. Some people use only Kanban when they're doing maintenance releases. They use agile when they're doing pure development releases, application development stuff. So use instances of all of those things and say how you actually plan to manage projects. Because you should be very clear on where to use what tool, because when you have a tool in your hand, everything looks like, they say, with the hammer in hand, everything looks like a nail. So that should not be how it is. So you should know which tool to use, where exactly, and what is the value proposition of using that tool.
So you mentioned Scrum, you mentioned extreme programming, Kanban, and what was that test management you mentioned, sir?
Test management, TDD, test-driven development.
Test-driven
development.
And can we use this Scrum, or can we use Agile in enterprise architecture also, sir?
Yes. There are companies who have used, a lot of companies use both Agile and Scrum, because the best part of the Agile story is Agile helps you to create working software, but working software need not deliver a business outcome or a business value. So that's where enterprise architecture comes in, when you're looking at the entire business value that you want to create for the organization or for the enterprise. So how do you mix that strategic level decision with the ground running of an agile project? So if you're able to mix the TOGAF side of the business with the agile or the Scrum part of it, or the safe agile is trying to bridge in that part, and TOGAF 10 is also very much positioned to ensure that you're mixing both the sides of the world equally, and so that you're delivering continuous business value. So that actually becomes a very powerful combination of things to use. And yes, TOGAF is being used in an agile way in many companies. So in fact, the ING case study that I was talking to you about, so they mix the enterprise architecture with the agile units within the same company, and they're delivering value. So if you are able to do that. Okay, I think I'll just pause here, Ravi, 1 second.
Sure.
I'll just be back. Give me 1 minute.
Sure, sir.
Yeah, so I think a lot of companies are mixing agile with architecture and those initiatives, because with the advent of agile, some people feel we don't need architects, but there is definitely the need for architects everywhere, except that you should know how to balance both the concerns, like the delivery pressures versus the strategic agile architecture initiatives, because most successful companies know how to balance these things well. If you're not able to balance, it'll be just one-sided stuff. So if you should be able to match your architecture initiatives with agile initiatives, and then only you can actually deliver business value. So I think that ING case study that I was talking about, that talks about how do you mix the strategic enterprise architecture with the agile concerns, and then how do you deliver continuous business value. So I think most companies which are quite established and successful, they know how to mix both of these quite well. It's not only one versus the other.
Okay. What kind of documents would you use for procuring 1 minute. For what kind of bid documents would you use for procurement management, and what kind of contract types should be used for engaging with contractors and suppliers, like RFQ, RFP, and all that stuff? Is that a part of project management, sir, or is it part of architecture?
No, it's actually part of basically how do you place bids and how do you win bids and all that. So you should know basically the difference between RFCs, RFQs, request for query, request for call, request for information, RFIs, and request for proposals. So you should know all of these things. Actually, there's a good read on that. I'll share you that detail, which is part of the Agile Business Leaders course that I was talking about. So that there's a good amount of detail on what to use them, what is the life cycle of these documents, how do you use them, who makes a request, how do you answer that request, how do you solve that request, how do you take to the various life cycle stages, what is the kind of detail that you mention in an RFC versus RFQ versus RFP, and then how do you engage the sales guys, the pre-sales guys in various of these interactions, and how do you use technology proposals and the bid winning documents, how do you create them, that sort of stuff. So it will give you that entire landscape of what is required to answer them quite well, and to the extent that you should have the technology focus on that document and the business focus. So you can say that also based on the company culture, but since I know this entire life cycle, I should be able to use it and make sense of that.
Do you also have some templates, sir, you can share? RFQ, RFQ?
I'll share you pointers of where you can find details on that.
Okay. Then what is this, sir? EVM, earned value management. How can it be implemented? I think this is something very specific to project management, right?
Yeah, earned value management is like what is your cost benefit analysis, like how much have you been your spend versus what is the benefit that you've got, and for every dollar that you spend, what is the value that you have earned. So there are precise ways in which you do the EVM in many companies. So it's typically based on a cost benefit analysis, or what they call it as customer success ratios or measures, or customer success factors they call them, or ROI or cost benefit analysis, or KPIs and matrices. So you can use a lot of these kind of things to find out which solution is superior, stronger, and what is the detail of that particular thing, and why do you use a certain solution versus the other. Why did you use solution A versus solution B, where both of them have this almost similar cost benefit analysis, and one is performing okay, one is performing better. So how do you kind of do those things? So those are all the things that will help you to understand the customer success factors that are there. And typically project management has a lot of detail in terms of the earned value management, based on how much have you invested versus what have you actually benefited from that investment. If you are able to showcase that level of detail, then typically it is that. So I think there's some formulas and all that which gets in use by a project manager. So you can look it up. So there is the PMI, Project Management Institute, has a lot of EVM formulas that you can actually look up and find, okay, what is the investment versus what is the returns? How do you calculate EVM in the middle of the project, at the end of the project, that sort of stuff, and then keep them updated. So that will give you what you should be focusing in terms of your requirements.
Okay, sir. I think that is pretty much. Sometimes they ask, okay, what kind of project management activities are involved? What all tasks do you carry out in your projects as a project
so you could
manager?
say you just your day in your life you can describe across various projects, like I've been involved in requirements, gathering requirements, implementing them, talking to business teams, talking to implementation teams, technology teams, rollout teams, bug fixing, rollout, strategic teams, design teams, solutioning teams. Whatever is your actual activity where you spend maximum amount of time, you can describe those.
Are there also some good videos to follow on project management, like how people effectively do agile project management, or what?
I will share you those links of those channels, and I think the people whom you can follow to do those kind of details.
Okay, sir. I think that was all about my recent questions I faced, or within my company they're asking.
Sure, Ravi. So I think here's wishing you all the best as you progress and attend a couple of calls to make that job hop that you are planning for within the company, internally or externally, wherever that is. So I think with these, it should prepare you well and keep your armor strong so that you're confident to answer this one. So I think I'll kind of stop the recording at this point of time.
Yes, sir. Thanks a lot for your time, sir.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, and all the very best.